Welcome to Gotta Run with Will. I'm Roger Robinson, guest host at the kind invitation of Will Sanchez. I'm a writer and a historian of running, and most of the people I've interviewed for Will Sanchez have been of historical interest, and we've gone right back to the very beginnings of New York running. Today our guest is, I think, more about the future than the past, but she does have a very interesting story, and that is Nnenna Lynch.
Hello.
Nnenna is the new, that is from just over 1 year, board chair of the New York Roadrunners, a really important governance job in the sport. Probably she's unknown, relatively unknown in the runners world, though she was has been a member of the board for rather over 10 years. She's a New Yorker and has been in New York all her life. So, Nnenna Lynch. First of all, Nnenna, let's get to your beginnings by telling us about your fascinating, very mixed name.
Yes.
It sounds like African and Irish, but tell me more.
Well, that's quite accurate, actually. So the first name, Nnenna, is Nigerian. And the connection to the name is my father was a historian of West African history. And my father was from Trinidad and Tobago, from a rural village in Tobago, actually, did his undergraduate degree in Vancouver, University of British Columbia, then his doctorate degree in London, and then his first job after graduate school was in Nigeria, at the University of Ibadan. And my mother, who was Canadian, followed him there, and that was their first home together. And they got married in Nigeria, and then he ended up in the US at Columbia University, and which enabled me to be a born and raised New Yorker. But when they had children, they decided to, in homage to their first home together and their connection to Nigeria, to choose Nigerian names.
And presumably the name Lynch came from his family in Trinidad and
That's
Tobago.
Right. Yes, that's right. And what we presume is that our ancestors were once owned by Irish slave owners. is the convention. Yeah, most surnames you derive from in the Caribbean and in former slaveholding countries were derived from your former owner.
Well, that's fascinating beginning. We should say, make sure Nnenna's name has two N's twice.
That's right. That's right.
And it's very unusual. And the name means?
So the literal meaning is father's mother, but the figurative meaning is special one.
And you are indeed. So we're going to find out a bit more about how special Nnenna is. So you were born in New York.
That's right.
And you were obviously looking around you, because I saw somewhere that even at quite a young age, you were observing the conditions of housing that people were living in. Yes,
that's right. I was sort of interested in urban planning, and so, but of course I didn't have the language to articulate it. So, I started at Hunter College Elementary School in pre-K. Now you enter in kindergarten, but I started in pre-K, and from that early time, my best friend was named Keisha, and she lived in Harlem. So I grew up in Morningside Heights, in the neighborhood right around Columbia University, which was and is a stable, sort of relatively middle class neighborhood, landmarked, beautiful, historic old buildings, and it sits side by side with Harlem. And when I was growing up in Harlem in the 70s and 80s, I would visit my friend Keisha regularly. The Harlem of those days was really quite devastated physically, and you had blocks and blocks of lots with rubble and shells of buildings. And it was the result of the disinvestment that had happened in the 70s and 80s.
So this is 80s?
Yes. Yeah. Well, in the 70s, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, the disinvestment predated that. And so even as a child, I was really curious about these two neighborhoods side by side that looked so different. And of course, I was very much aware Harlem was and is largely Black. Morningside Heights is largely, was and is largely white, and probably more mixed, but still there was this contrast that sort of set me on a path that led to the career I have today.
That's really interesting. You're a very observant child.
Yeah, well, I didn't have any of the language to describe all this, but it made a big impression.
Yeah. And since this is a running program,
Yeah.
since we've got to run and got to talk about
Yes, of course.
it. When did you first start to think of yourself as a runner in some way?
Well, there are a couple of versions of the story, but I started in schoolyard races like a lot of kids do. It's like, I'll race you. And what I discovered is I could beat all the boys in my grade. So there was that sort of point of reference. But my school also had what we called the Olympiad that you could participate in. This was the elementary school program. 4th, 5th, and 6th graders could participate in. And I had an older sister. And when she was in 4th grade, she, basically spanked everybody. It was phenomenal performance. It became the stuff of schoolyard legends. And then, so when she was going into 5th grade and preparing, she decided she wanted to train for the Olympiad. And she did this with a friend. This friend happened to have a father who had run, who was a jogger. This was, the 80s. He had participated in the jogging boom. And he said, okay, well, I'll train you. And he happened to live close to the school, so he took the two of them, and I would tag along to the park. And, they'd, have them do a couple sprints between trees. And then she had another, Olympiad, like phenomenal Olympiad. And then he decided, I'm going to find a track team for the two of you girls. And he found a track team, and he found the coach that eventually became my coach, but that's a slightly longer story. So my sister joined the team. At that point, my parents had broken up. We were what's known as latchkey kids. I would follow my sister to these track practices and sit there and wait for her. And the coach eventually said, well, what are you doing sitting there? Come on out. And I was like, well, I'm not signed up. He said, well, I don't care. And, I didn't have the clothing. I didn't have anything. And he was just one of those people, was sort of like a Pied Piper for running. Uh-huh. And so I started participating, but wasn't official. And then when I decided I said, I told my mother, I want to sign up for the track team. I want to be an official member. She said, oh, no. That's your sister's thing. You should do something else. And my sister also protested. She said, no, this is my thing. And so that was sort of, and for a year, I stopped going to these practices. And then eventually, and I tried ballet, and then I tried tennis. That was what my father pushed. But eventually, that experience, that little experience I had going to the track team, running, meeting the coach, my point of reference in the schoolyard, I then eventually insisted that I was going to join the track team. And that was when I was 10 years old. And yeah, that's when I was 10 years old. And that's how it all started.
What I'd heard from New York friends who remember you as girls.
Yeah.
The Lynch girls, the Lynch sisters, were very much associated. That probably was more in your teenage time, high school time.
That's right. So my sister, when she was, I believe, 13, she broke the national record for 13 years old for 1,500 meters. So right away, she was really quite a phenom. And then I came up behind her, and then I won the AAU National Cross Country Championships when I was 12 years old, 1984. And this is back when newspapers wrote about high school sports and wrote about youth sports. And so because we were both quite good, and we went to a good school, and we were these two sisters who were standout runners, and we became known as the Lynch sisters.
A little later in our conversation, we're going to be mentioning the Tallow twins, who very similar pairing in England.
Yes, of course.
At a similar kind of time, but we'll get to that shortly. We're going to deal with Nnenna's time in New York, and then a later time in New York with a little interlude, a little kind of intermission when we go off to England for a while. So that's going to be our basic structure. And so now we need to take you from high school to college. And from, just to cut a cord or two from the reading I've done about your college time, you were a fascinating mix. You were Phi Beta Kappa, which presumably means an outstanding student, right?
That's right, yeah.
You were obviously an outstanding track star. You were, I think, deeply involved in the campus mission.
Yep.
And at some point, and I haven't quite got the exact date, People's Magazine chose you and your sister, as among the 50 most beautiful people in the world. Is that correct? I mean, that's a pretty good foursome.
Yeah, so let's see. So that came later.
Stitch those together for us.
Yes, yeah. So I had a really successful high school career and decided to go to Villanova University, which at the time was really the dominant middle distance program for women. A lot of depth, people like Vicky Huber, Sonia O'Sullivan. That was really appealing to me, to go to a team that was really strong and had a lot of depth versus a team where I would be the star from day one. We won 4 consecutive national cross-country titles, which was unprecedented. I won 1 individual title. I won 3 individual conference titles, and then another several relay titles. So yes, it was a successful career. I also got serious about academics. So as a high schooler, I was moderately serious, I would say. I like to hang out and party, and so I wasn't probably as focused as I should have been. And I got really focused in college. I had a sense that, I'm really setting the foundation for my future. And so I studied sociology with a business minor and had quite a successful collegiate career, then won a Rhodes Scholarship, and then went off to Oxford. And it was that first semester at Oxford, the fall of '93, a couple of things happened. I got a call that I was a finalist for the NCAA Woman of the Year award, which is a relatively new award. I flew back to the US, I ended up winning it. And after that, I then got a call from People Magazine that they wanted to include me. And I think there was a decent amount of press that came out related to the Women of the Year award. And then I was invited to be photographed for the 50 Most Beautiful People magazine. And that came out in April 1994. And that was, I would say, through high school, we were definitely the Lynch sisters. And then, so my sister went to Texas, I went to Villanova. And I would say there we started to develop, I think, our different identities and different profiles.
But she was associated with you, I think, and I'm quoting my wife,
Yes.
as the Gap Girl.
Well, yes, it was 1989, we got a call. The Gap wanted to include us in their Individuals of Style campaign. And this was a campaign, it was shot mostly in black and white by famous photographers and very simple images, portraits. And they were pairing us with, they wanted to do the Lynch sisters, and they wanted to pair us with Annie Leibovitz. And so we shot that in 1989, yeah, and appeared on bus stops and windows and billboards and that sort of thing. But it's interesting because I don't think I ever actually saw a poster because I was up at college and, I was busy running, doing my things. And it was an amazing experience to work with Annie Leibovitz and to see her in action, but it didn't really change my life in any way.
What did change your life perhaps was when you went off to Oxford.
Yes.
And as a very famous American, and then you would go there and probably nobody had heard of you.
For the most part. So my first coach when I was there, I don't know if you know this, so I ended up training with Bruce, but I went to Oxford in the fall of 1993. I didn't meet him until 1995. And in fact, when I went to Oxford, I wasn't sure if I was going to keep running. I had been a collegiate athlete. As a middle distance runner, of course, that means you're running year round, cross country in the fall, indoor track in the winter, outdoor track in the summer, spring and summer. It was pretty intense. And so when I won the Rhodes Scholarship and went to Oxford, I actually thought, well, you know what? I might just be a full-time student.
But had you at that point won the World University title?
No. So what ended up happening, so I went to Oxford. I wasn't certain if I'd keep running. Within a few weeks, I thought, I miss it, and I really do want to run. And I'd gotten a note from Phil Banning. Does that name mean anything to you? He was former British athlete, British coach. I think what is known in Britain as a master coach. He'd done a bunch of certifications, and he actually reached out to me and offered to coach me, and I took him up on it. But it was not a great setup, largely because he was too far from Oxford to see him regularly. So he would write down workouts, and I would do them, and it wasn't particularly fun way to train.
You then went on and you won the World University Championships.
That's right.
And you, I think twice at least, won the trial for the United States cross-country team.
That's right.
And ran, therefore, for the United States in the World Cross-Country.
That's right.
Yes. Pretty distinguished stuff. One or two PRs, just so you've got the picture. In a 1500 of 4:14, a 5000 of 15:41, finishing fourth in the US Championship. 32 minutes 47 for 10,000. Ran Peachtree, ran 32:48 at Peachtree, ran Cherry Blossom. Did you run it? Because a lot of our viewers will be people who will know the road race scene, and that's where you're now associated. Any other of the major road races that you ran?
Well, one of my favorites, and I apparently am still the course record holder, was actually in England, in the Portsmouth 5-miler.
Oh, okay.
And this was after I connected with Bruce. I'd been training under him for a few months. It was the winter, so it was December of 1995. I won the Portsmouth 5-miler in 25:35, which at the time was a world-leading time in the 5-mile. Now, 5-mile, of course, is not as common an event, but it was a moment where it gave me a ton of hope and optimism, because I had, for the 2 prior years, sort of really struggled after college. I had been injured and, trying to get fit again. And so, and of course, at the end of 1995, you're going into 96, which is an Olympic year. And as an athlete, you're always thinking in terms of Olympic years. So I remember that so distinctly, that I had run this world-leading time, and I was going into an Olympic year. And so it was a moment of incredible optimism. So I would say that's probably one of my favorite. But an interesting note that ties back to today and New York Roadrunners is, from a young age, I was running in age group races, with my peers, when I was a teen and in high school. But I would run in New York Roadrunner races. So, and my first time, according to the official record, my first race was actually in 1995, June 1st, 1985, that is. 85. Yeah, so I was 13, and it was in what was then known as the Legs Mini Marathon.
Oh, did you run that?
Yeah.
Yes.
In 1985.
The race.
Yeah. And there's a whole set
started as the Crazy Legs.
Yes.
Yes, the Crazy Legs
Yes.
Mini, and has gone on now. And now is the New York Women's.
Now it's the MasterCard Mini.
MasterCard Mini, is it? Yes.
That's right. And this is all right there on the New York Roadrunners website. There were, I ran a number of their races, and many races which, or not, at least a couple which no longer exist, actually. Yeah.
And then we've done the teaser. We've 2 or 3 times mentioned Bruce, and we've mentioned the Teller twins. And my main qualification for talking with Nnenna today is that I am a lifetime friend of Bruce Tulloh, British international runner, European champion over 5,000 meters, great cross-country runner. He and I were at Cambridge University together, and so we were teammates as well as close friends. And I continue to be friends of Bruce and his wife Sue from a very early stage. They used to come and visit me in Cambridge when Clive was a toddler, and then the twins were born, twin girls who became fine runners. The other thing that Bruce is known for in America is that after he retired from the track, and he still wanted another challenge, and in this completely zany way, decided that he would attack the record for running coast to coast in America. And Sue, in her calm English way, said, "All right, dear." And went along and acted as his driver. Most astonishing thing. Tell us about your time with Bruce and Sue. Bruce has now died, but Sue continues to be a good friend of both Nnenna and myself.
When I started to run again at Oxford, I trained with Phil Banning. There was a member of the Oxford team who was training under Bruce. And I shared with him, I was like, I don't know about this situation. And he said, well, I'm training with this guy, Bruce Tulloh, and he's training, Britain's best marathoner, long distance runner, Richard Naruka. I mean, maybe you should, I'd introduce you. And I thought, okay. And so, and this was important. This individual also had a car, so he could drive us from Oxford to Marlborough, where they were. And so in my diary that night, I actually wrote, it was February, 1995, went to Marlboro, met with Bruce, quiet man. His wife, Sue, was there, bubbly, and Richard Naruka seems quite pleasant. Something along those lines. And that really captures it. I mean, what I love about Bruce and the setup that he'd created with Richard and other athletes and was really the whole package. Bruce and Sue were really a team. They were both incredibly lovely. They became surrogate parents, really. Richard was always sort of an inspiration. He was real standout marathoner, trainer, and it was a highlight of my professional running career to have trained, to be sort of embedded with them. And then when I ended up leaving Oxford in 1996, I decided to move to Washington, D.C., and I felt so connected to Bruce and the setup that we decided that I would train under him long distance. And I think that was actually a mistake, because I think part of the magic of the setup was being in person. And but anyway, yes, it was a real highlight.
They were, and Sue still is great hosts, among other things.
Amazing. Well, one of my favorites, we'd go out for a run and, often contending with the British elements, cold, rainy, and, we'd come in and Sue would just whip up, tea and scones and cake, and it was always, just lovely. Everything about it was lovely.
Their nutrition has always astonished us because they eat more or less continuously, including large pieces of cake for afternoon tea. And Bruce Teller remained 5'7", tiny, boyish,
yes,
great long legs, never put an ounce of weight on, and it was an absolute miracle. But Sue was and still is a wonderful cook. Well, it was a great experience for you to be part of that scene, and in a way a great privilege. So then you came back to America, and you went to DC first. So we're not quite back in your next New York manifestation, but that's coming soon. What did you do in DC?
So at that point, I was actually still finishing up my thesis at Oxford, and so I was still technically a student, which is what allowed me to then compete in the World University Games, which in 1997. But what brought me to DC was, as often the case, it was a boy.
Oh yes, yes.
Who was from DC, and so lived there for a few months. And then when we broke up, I decided it sort of set me on a path of sort of wandering a little bit. I was still running professionally, but trying to find the right setup. And my first stop after that was Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where I trained with Joan Nesbitt, who had been a '96 Olympian in the 10,000 meters, and then ended up in Orlando with a coach named Brooks Johnson, who's in the U.S. a legendary coach at Stanford. And he was now, at that point, at Orlando and had been working with Disney on creating a whole sports program there. And I finished out my career being trained by him. So
at this stage, you're a professional runner.
I am.
So when you ran Peachtree and Cherry Blossom and so on, this was after 1981, and so therefore you were making money from that. When did you actually decide to stop that, or did it just happen?
Well, the word decide is sort of what I'm pausing at. So starting really in college, I had breathing problems, and I'll explain why I refer to them as breathing problems. And so every so often I would have real distress, and it'd be difficult to breathe, and it would affect my performance. Sometimes it happened in races, sometimes it would happen in workouts. But over time, through the mid to late 90s, it became it went from sporadic to chronic. And so by 1998, 99, I was really struggling quite a bit. And so I was there in Orlando with Brooks Johnson, and we thought that maybe it was in part the environment that was, so we decided that I would head out to the Olympic Training Center, which is outside of San Diego, in drier climate. And so that's where I continued training, back to being long distance, which was less than ideal, but it didn't help. And my times just continued to get worse and worse and worse. So And just to give you some context, in 1992, when I was a junior in college, I qualified for the Olympic trials in 2 events, in the 1,500 meters and then the 3,000 meters. And I made the finals in the 3,000 meters. In 1996, I qualified, when I was training under Bruce, I qualified in the 1,500 meters. By 2000, I couldn't even qualify for the Olympic trials. That's how badly I was struggling. And so I retired, but it was really in a sense of forced retirement. What I found out several years later is that, and I was, visiting doctors and, trying all sorts of things to help with the breathing, and I was given inhalers and all sorts of stuff, but nothing ever helped. So what I found out years later is that I never had, and because I was being treated for exercise-induced asthma, I never had exercise-induced asthma. What I came to find out is that long after I retired, I had something called vocal cord dysfunction, where the vocal cords close when they should open, and therefore impair the airwaves. So anyway, that was the sad end to my professional career.
You had a pretty good career. One more race that I just want to talk about, and you can tell us the exact date. After you'd officially, I think, retired, you weren't taking it seriously. You ran the New York City Marathon.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that people know of that. Bruce and Sue came over from England. I think Bruce may have had another athlete in it. I don't remember, or perhaps they just came for you. They stayed with Catherine and me in New York. We all went out and watched you. And at that point in the field, the absolute elites had gone flying by, and then others, and then from then onwards, people were beginning to struggle because you're getting into the kind of 240s or thereabout. And suddenly, this gliding, floating creature came smoothly by, and Bruce said, "That's Nnenna. That's the first time I'd ever seen you."
Is that right?
And it was quite a revelation. And then we had dinner with you in New York. But what did you run? 250, was it?
255.
255, and that was your only marathon?
That was my only marathon. And I think more significant at that time is, so, I'd moved back to New York to start my real life, get a real job. I was an analyst at Goldman Sachs and training, 3-4 days a week, very light, low mileage, getting up at, 5 a.m. to squeeze in my little runs here and there. And so with the goal of really just breaking 3, I was pleased.
So now you're back in New York. Mm-hmm. And so now we can start to stitch together some of these threads. Mm-hmm. Your kind of childhood philanthropic eye and concern about social disparity, and especially in housing, and then your general desire to help, the work you did with the missionary group at Villanova. And those things begin to come together, because after Goldman Sachs, then you took a different direction in your work.
Yes, so even Goldman Sachs actually was a building block for me. It was actually when I was at Oxford, I discovered, in undergrad I'd studied sociology. At Oxford I decided to study social anthropology, and still not quite sure exactly what this will mean for a career. I thought at the time I might want to be an academic, but while I was at Oxford, I discovered the term economic development, economic and community development. And for me that was like the light bulb going off, and because I thought, this is a way of engaging with neighborhoods, communities that's very constructive. It's about housing and job creation, and so I was really fascinated, and that's what I decided that's what I want to do, and that was my North Star. So when I came back to New York, I did a fair amount of networking, and the advice I was given was really, in order to do that work, you need to understand finance. And the best way to learn finance is to actually go work on Wall Street. And so that's what I did. And so going to Goldman Sachs was really, for me, a skill building exercise. I did the 2-year analyst program. During that time, I actually met a developer, a real estate developer who was working in distressed neighborhoods. And he offered me a job, and so I left Goldman to then do real estate development, and was finally doing the work that I had been thinking about for a very long time. And I would say that has really been the North Star of my career, continued to be economic and community development. But a different way of saying it is it's about creating thriving communities. And so I've done it in different ways. I later went to work for Mayor Bloomberg and working on economic development policy and large-scale projects and initiatives. And then a few years ago, decided to start my own firm doing what I call mission-driven real estate development.
And is that Xylem?
Xylem. Xylem.
Tell us about it. Xylem Project.
So Xylem Projects is a firm that is focused on creating, mixed-use projects in urban settings and really focused on urban revitalization. And we have 4 pillars. The first is community enrichment. Second is design. Third is sustainability and innovation. And so it's really about doing the work of real estate development, which is so important to, any community, but in doing so in a thoughtful way.
Fascinating. And then you got interested in coming back into the sport of running. 2014, I think, you joined the board of New York Roadrunners. Mm-hmm. To be associated with a race that goes through many such neighborhoods.
Yes.
That you're talking about, that is in a way a tour, and where the work of the New York Roadrunners, especially over the last 10 years, I would say, or just over, since 2012 and Superstorm Sandy, a lot of its work has been reaching out and making a better job of being in contact with all the communities of New York, rather than just Manhattan. I wrote, after Superstorm Sandy, I wrote a piece that said, talking about the effects of that, we cannot continue to expect poor people to come out onto their streets to cheer for rich people. We need to do something about that. And the New York Roadrunners, to their great credit, have been doing, reaching out into the boroughs and putting on events and doing much more than they did before that event. Mm-hmm. You're part of that. So you came onto the board of the Roadrunners, mm-hmm. and I know you were associated with what was then called, I think, the Team for Kids.
Yeah, that's right. I joined in 2014. I had gotten to know Mary Wittenberg because when I was in the Bloomberg administration, periodically she'd come down to City Hall and meet with folks to discuss the marathon and other events. And she invited me to join the board when I left after the Bloomberg administration. And, and remember we sat down for, I don't know, it was coffee or lunch or breakfast or something, and she was telling me about the organization. And what really got me interested was when she told me about the youth and community programs that they had. I thought back to my childhood and how important running was in my life. And so that for me, and that was really what drew me in. And then later ended up, after, I don't know, 3 or 4 years on the board, I'm not exactly sure, I ended up chairing the committee that deals with youth and community services. We later renamed it to Community Impact. But yeah, as long as I've been on the board, for sure, there's been a focus on, and I feel like the organization has always had this as part of it, is reaching out to the community but always trying to do better. And in fact, it's not just about the community relations of the neighborhoods that you pass through, but it's about who's showing up for our events and who are we serving and what programs can we bring to bear for communities throughout New York City. But there's also another interesting, and I touched on this, but my coach growing up. So when I started running at the age of 10, my coach was Barry Geisler. Now, Barry is important because Barry was actually the president of New York Roadrunners 1971 to 1972. So he came after Vince Chiappetta and preceded Fred LeBeau. And again, I said that, I ran in New York Roadrunners races from the time I was a teenager. So there were these multiple sort of connections to this organization. And not only that, but my coach Barry, starting in the mid-1960s, had started the very first youth programs. Now, they later died out and were brought back in the late 90s. And is sort of more in the form that we know them in today, and we continue to grow and adapt them. But there was this, amazing sort of historic and personal connection that I had to the organization, but in particular to youth running.
It's been a fabulously successful program, we should say. As an educator myself, the statistics are really quite clear that the kids that get involved in this running program do better at school and have better motivation and better life management and everything else. It's really absolutely provable, the benefits that it brings.
Yeah.
So it's a fabulous thing to do.
And then in June 2023, I became chair.
By unanimous election.
That's right. That's right.
Well, all right. Well, I said at the beginning that I see you as and it's something to do with our relative age. I see you to do with the future as much as the past. And so looking into the future, now that you're settling into that job, been doing it for just over a year, what kind of vision do you have? And just to remind people, the chair of the board of directors is not the CEO.
That's right.
This is a governance role rather than a management or operational role, but it's more of a mission and strategy role. So what would be your vision?
Yeah, well, to continue to deepen our impact and our reach. You know, we just broke the world record again for the number of participants in the New York City Marathon, but it's really about so much more. You know, we're best known for the marathon, but it's really about so much more. Near and dear to my heart will always be the youth and community programs. And we continue to grow and expand that work, and we, serve somewhere in the order of 200,000, kids throughout the U.S. actually. And in New York City, over 100,000 last year. But we can always do more. And, and when I think about running, I think about, one of the things I'd like to say is, if running were a pill, it would be a blockbuster. When you think about, you've touched on it, all the benefits of running, which are, psychic and social and mental and physical, that I see myself as, the head cheerleader for the sport of running, and that the role that New York road runners can play in New York City's civic life. And most New Yorkers will tell you it is their favorite day of the year, the marathon is. And so there's a lot of, positive energy that we capture. I think we need to figure out how to capture that more days of the year. We have the mixed blessing of our races selling out. It's probably the number one complaint we hear. And listen, not everybody wants to run a race. So several years ago, we started Open Run, which is modeled after the British, park run. So I am going always to be an advocate for thinking about how to expand our reach among different populations. And so that's really what I'm focused on.
And of course, you've got a pure space problem. You've got a hugely populated city. And if you count Manhattan, one big park. It's big, but it's not totally flexible. You can't have a race of more than 50,000 people. It's just not physically possible.
No, but that's where, I think some of these, thinking about how we use space differently. So, our Open Run concept, that's in, it's like 16 parks, smaller neighborhood parks throughout the city, and each one is different, but it's, same every week, same day, same day of the week, same time. Community members will come together and, do a 5K run through their park. And sometimes it's a couple loops, depending on the park, it's a couple loops or it's, 3 loops. But so there are different ways to engage, New Yorkers and the running community. And it doesn't always have to be a race.
No, and in case people don't know of this, the park run model started in the UK, has been hugely successful. It's beginning to take hold in America, but it took a long time, largely because of insurance issues here. But in the UK, in other countries like New Zealand, where I am part of the year, and other parts of Europe, these park runs attract a huge following. And that's very simple. Same place, same time, same place, same course, same 5K every Saturday morning at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock or whatever the set time is, and people just show up. There's no registration. You have your barcode, and the barcode is read at the finish, and it's all so wonderfully simple, and yet immensely appealing.
Yeah.
And it's not a race, but it can be if you want to turn it into a race. But it's a run, and it's a very successful concept, and I'm glad to hear that New York road runners are getting onto a variant of it, because it would work really well.
Yeah.
Anything else that you see that you want to put across to people as part of your vision?
Yeah, come out and run with us.
Well, it's always that simple, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you talk about the pill, the magic
The
pill.
blockbuster pill. It is magic.
That's the individual way of looking at it. I've looked at it more as the effect on the whole of society. And I think I've quoted this on this program before, and Will forgive me, I hope, that I've described running in a big event like this last New York City Marathon as the biggest participant peaceful activity in human history. Participant and peaceful are two key words because wars are obviously bigger and Super Bowl is obviously bigger, but they're spectators, they're not players. Whereas in the marathon, they're players, they're participants. And they're doing something which is totally healthy, totally participant, beneficial in every possible way. Really hard to find a fault with what running does to society.
The list of benefits of running is social, and that's what I mean by it. And actually, I can plug the recent op-ed I wrote for the New York Times.
Yes.
It was precisely that. I totally agree with you that the whole mood and culture and ethos around running is really what I describe in the article as a model for civic life.
And it's a model that fits very well with your experience and the mission that you seem to have set for yourself in a quite remarkable way when you were about 8 years old.
You're giving me way more credit.
Well, I'm really impressed by that. So Nnenna Lynch, fairly new chair of the board of directors of the New York Roadrunners, philanthropist, real estate developer, and in her own right, outstanding athlete, and now outstanding strategist and visionary for running. So thank you for your time. Thank you, Will Sanchez, for, as ever, hosting this program. Useful, not just useful, valuable, insightful, culturally significant as it is. Thank you, Will. Thank you to Manhattan Neighborhood Network for providing the facilities, and thank you to their really helpful collaborative staff and very professional staff for the way they do these programs. So that concludes another Got to Run with Will, and final word of one more thanks to Nnenna Lynch.
Thank you.
And so then we go out to dinner.